Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin, Daf Mem Bet. This month's learning is sponsored by Jonathan Loring in honor of his wife, Leah Ackner, and their children, Zev and Meira. From the first day I met my wife in Hebrew class at JTS, to watching her show kindness when we volunteered together to help those in need, and even when I had to wait 9 years for a first date. My wife has always been an inspiration to me and everyone she meets. Thank you for these 20 years, and Bezrat Hashem to many more. I love you, wife C. Mazal Tov. Okay, we're going to get started. The third chapter. Okay. This third chapter is maybe not going to be the most fun chapter, I will warn you. It's going to be a lot of body parts of animals. Okay, we have a nice picture that someone generously created and is willing to share with everybody. So it's now up on our site, and I don't even know who it is to give credit. But maybe I'll find that out as we go on. But we're going to see this picture of the animal. Okay. And this picture is going to help us somewhat. I mean, nothing's perfect and no picture has everything in it. If you have the Schottenstein, you have the Koren, they have excellent pictures of all the different parts of the animals. And throughout this chapter, I recommend you use the pictures. I don't have rights to share them all, but if you can get access to it, it'll be very helpful. When I find other pictures to share, there's some that I have easy access to, but they're a little disgusting looking. So I've been deliberating about using them or not. But anyway, okay. Here are our parts of the body. So we're going to start, okay, this one happens to be in Hebrew, but we're going to start going through the different parts, okay, and hopefully I'll be okay with all the English translations. Maybe you'll help me here and there if I'm stuck. Okay, Elu treifot bebema. Okay, before we even start, let's just talk about what a treifa is, right? We've talked about this a bunch of times before, but it's an animal with some sort of, and I want to be as vague as possible right now because we're going to have two major approaches to dealing with treifa today that we're going to come up with. One is the Mishna, one is only going to come up with the Gemara. But it basically is, there's some sort of tradition, we're going to learn today that it was a tradition passed down to Moshe, which treifot are problematic. Okay, it's not anything that's bad in the animal, right? But it's something very specific. And we're going to have a very specific list here, although we're going to learn throughout today that this list is not comprehensive. Okay, so, or maybe it should be, maybe it isn't. We're going to have a whole discussion. So these are, now we use the word, I've said this many times, but we use the word treif to basically say something that's not kosher, but it's not really true. A treifa is an animal that was slaughtered completely properly, but there was something wrong with the animal, okay? And that makes the animal not kosher, not able to be eaten. So, elu treifot bebehema, nikuvat haveshet, upsukata gargeret. These are the first two, we've discussed them before, where you have a problem in the gullet, or the windpipe, okay? So we have, right, the veshet, that leads down to the lungs to help with, that leads down to that's like the esophagus, and it leads down into the body, into the stomach. The kaneh is the windpipe, okay? Now we learned already that there's a difference. The veshet, okay, that one, if you have any sort of nekev, nikuvat, it has a hole, a perforation. That already makes it a problem. Psukata gargeret, which is the kaneh, the windpipe, it has to be cut, right? There's like a slice in it, okay? Not just a little perforation. Nikev krom shamoch, okay? We're going to see here, there's going to be a list of things that are nikev with just a perforation in them, okay? So the krum shamoch, the membrane of the brain, okay, that's here in the brain. Nikev halev lebeit halalo, if there's some sort of hole in the heart, okay, which is near where the openings are in the heart. Okay, the heart has, right, openings, empty spaces. If it's like around there, that's where the nikev is a problem. Nishbera shidra v'nifsaka chut shela. Okay, if you break one of the vertebrae in the back, and, right, there's the spinal cord is going through all the vertebrae, so breaking one means basically that the spinal cord is cut. Nitala kaved, if you take out the liver, and there's nothing of the liver left. Okay, they don't point out here where the liver is. I'm not sure where it is here. Maybe it's over there. I'm really not so good at all this anatomy stuff. Okay, so now, I'm not sure. Anyway, the liver, now a liver can function if you have partial liver. I know this because my sister-in-law just had a liver transplant. They basically take out a part of someone who's alive, part of their liver, and they transplant it into someone else. Because you don't need your whole liver, and here you see it in the Mishna, right? It has to be completely removed where you have no part of the liver left in order for it to be called a treifa. Hare'ashi nikva o shechasra. Okay, if you have a lung, here's the lungs. Okay, right, that's where the kaneh leads down into the lungs. And then you have a lung with a perforation, or it's missing a part of it. Rabbi Shimon Omer, he disagrees a little bit, and he says, it has to be a perforation that goes all the way down to the simfonot. We're going to have all these things we're going to have long sugis about, okay, or maybe shorter ones, longer ones, but the whole thing about the simfonot, it's these bottom parts of the lung. We're going to get into all this much later. Nikva keva. Okay, now we're going to get to the keva. Now there's 4 stomachs in an animal. Okay, it's called the hemses, the berakosot, the keva, and the kares. So right now we're on the keva, one of those stomachs. If you have a perforation in it, in the keva. Nikva hamara, that's the gallbladder. Nikvu had. So again, we're in a list of nikva. Any perforation in the keva, that stomach, in the mara, in the nikvu adakin, these are the small intestines, that's here. The small intestine. Hakares hapnimit. Okay, so now when we get to the kares, this other stomach, if on the inner part, any perforation is an issue, shenikva, o shenikra rova chitzona, or on the outer part of it, you need a tear that is on the majority of it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, hagdola tefach v'tana beruba. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says no. It depends on the size of the tear. It doesn't necessarily have to be the majority. If it's a large animal, then it's the size of a tefach. If a hand's breadth. If it's a small animal, then it's the majority. Okay? Depends on what size animal, how much of it needs to be torn in order for it to be considered serious. Hemses ubetakosot shenikvu lachutz. Okay, we have the hemses and we have the betakosot that have any sort of perforation on the outer part of them. Those are the other 2 stomachs. Nafla min agag. Okay, now we get to a different category. This is some trauma happened to the animal, like the animal fell from the roof. Now, even if you don't see any parts that are broken, it's a treifa. Nishtabru rov tzaloteha. If most of the ribs, okay, the majority of the ribs have broken. Udrusat haze'ev. If it is trampled, if it is attacked by a wolf. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda omer drusat haze'ev bedaka, udrusat ari begasa, drusat hanetz ba'of hadak, udrusat hagas ba'of hagas. Okay, so now he has a list, and he basically says it depends what kind of animal it is, what it was attacked by. So, he says, drusat haze'ev, if it was attacked by a wolf, only if it's a small animal do we consider it a treifa. If it was attacked by a lion, a large animal that was attacked by a lion is a problem. If it was a bird, a small bird, then attacked by a hawk, that's the nates, it will be a problem. If it's drusat hagas is a large bird, has to attack a large bird. Notice, if it's a large bird, only if it's attacked by a large bird is it considered a treifa. That's our list. Now comes the Mishnah with the final line. It says, Zeh haklal, this is the rule. Kol she'en kamoa chaya, treifa. Now here comes the big rule. What joins these now? We're going to see. Okay, I'm going to show you the list right now. And a second. I'm going to show you the list. And what this Mishnah is basically doing at the end is kind of giving a rule to what's the common denominator about all these things. And, which we're going to see later, is opening the door to add more to the list. Okay? So, let's go so what does it say? Zeh klal, this is the rule. Kol she'en kamoha chaya treifa. And this is something we've discussed before. A treifa is generally assumed to be an animal that is not going to survive. Kol she'en kamoha, another animal like that would not live. Because in other words, what's happening now, we already slaughtered the animal. So obviously the animal's not going to live. But if it was a different animal like that was still alive, with this problem, it would not survive. Okay, and the assumption is it wouldn't survive 12 months. Okay, even though it doesn't say that explicitly in the Mishnah. So let's just go through very quickly, and we'll see it on the chart here. We have Nikuvara Veshet, okay, and Psukara Gargeret, right? Those are the 2 simanim and the problems with each one. Nikev Krom Shalmoch, the membrane in the brain. Then we have the heart. Okay, Nikev Alev Tul the Beit Chalalo, it has to be. The perforation has to be near where the openings are in the heart. Nishbira Shidra, we have the vertebrae breaking with the spinal cord cut. Nitala Kaveh, we have no liver left in the animal. Re'ash Nikva, we have a lung that has a perforation in it. Next one, Osha Chasra, or it's missing a part of it. Okay, and Rabbi Shimon says it has to be down to the simfonot. Nikva Keva, Okay, the stomach, the mara, the gallbladder, nikvu adakim, the intestines, hakares hapnimisha nikva, now we're back to the other stomachs, or either it has a perforation in it, or nikra rova chitzona, or the majority of it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, was a tefach in a big animal, and the majority in a small animal, which, by the way, the majority in a small animal could be actually less than a tefach. Then we get to the hemses and the beta koso, which are two separate, right? But each one of them have a nekev on the outside. Then we have the falling from the roof. We have most of the ribs are broken and attacked by a wolf or maybe a different animal or bird, depending on what animal or bird you are. Okay, that's our list. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So now comes Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and now we go to the second side of the study guide. Okay, the second part. Now we're going to see there's a big machloket. Now what we said in the Mishnah about treifa ein achaya, meaning a treifa is not going to survive 12 months, we're now going to learn, although not yet, but we're going to see within the sugya there's two approaches. Some people think that a treifa is chaya. And there's just a list, it was the tradition, that this is the list of treifas, but it doesn't necessarily mean the animal's going to die. Okay, you could have a treifa, but the animal could survive. That's not the criteria by which we determine how something is a treifa, or if something is a treifa or not. So now what we want to do is we're going to go through and figure out where are the psukim for these things in the Torah. Where do we find an allusion to this in the Torah? Because it definitely doesn't say this explicitly. Okay, so let's start our sugya. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Remez l'treifa min Torah minayin. Where do we have an allusion to the fact? Now notice he says allusion, remez, not an explicit pasuk, because he knows there's no explicit pasuk. So he's asking, where is there a remez in the Torah that there's treifa? Okay, the Gemara says, what kind of a question is Resh Lakish asking? Minayin? What do you mean? It says explicitly in the Torah you can't eat a treifa. They think right now that Resh Lakish's question is, how do we know you can't eat a treifa? It says, Ubasar b'sadeh treifa lo tuchelu. Don't eat meat that you find in a field that's a treifa. You can't eat it. So here it says you can't eat a treifa. So I don't need to say, where is there allusion in the Torah to this? It says it explicitly. So now they say, no. What he meant was, where is the allusion to the fact that the definition of a treifa is an animal that's not going to survive 12 months, as we saw in the Mishnah. So they say, right, and that's what they're going to say. As we see in the Mishnah, dekatane seifa, as it says in the Mishnah, zaklav, this is the rule. Kol she'en kamo chaya treifa. So what do you learn from this, right? If an animal like this, a parallel animal like this that was still alive would not survive, michlal, from there you can infer the treifa ein chaya. From there you can infer that what a treifa is an animal that won't live. Min nalan, what is the source for this? Okay, that's what they want to know. So now they say dichtiv. Well, it says in the Torah, and where is this? This is in the section about kashrut. Now, we said this is an illusion because the simple reading of this pasuk is definitely not what they're going to say. Okay, what does the pasuk say? Vizot hachaya asher tochlu. Okay, this is the beginning of the section about what animals are kosher, what animals are not kosher in Vayikra chapter 11. Okay, and it says, right, speak to the Dabru b'nei Israel, more speak to the Jewish people and tell them, Zot chaya asher tochlu mikol behema asher al haaretz. Simple reading of that pasuk. This is the chaya, this is the animal that you can eat from among all the animals there are. And then you're going to get a list of kosher animals. But the word chaya, which means animal, right? It actually literally means undomesticated animal, as we've seen. But what it's going to say is, Zot chaya chaya milashon chayim, from the language of life. Okay? So, what are they darshan? Chaya echol, eat an animal. What animals are you allowed to eat? Animals that are alive. She'en chaya lo techol. But if it's not alive, now what does it mean not alive? Of course it's alive. You're going to slaughter it. It's alive. But it's not an animal that can survive. Meaning, again, can't survive more than 12 months. So michlal, from there you can infer the treifa lo chaya. Okay, from there you can infer that a treifa is an animal that is not going to live. Okay. Ulamanda amar treifa chaya minale. Now, if you say treifa is chaya, now they don't even tell you there's another opinion. They just talk about it as if it's obvious there's another opinion, right? So the one who says treifa chaya, which they know there's an opinion that says a treifa can survive, minale, where does that opinion get it from? So now they're going to answer, and you can see from the chart that they're going to give a pasuk, and then they're going to reject that pasuk and bring a different one instead. Nafkale mi zot chaya asher tuchlu. Okay, they're going to learn it from the same pasuk, exact same pasuk. Zot chaya asher tuchlu. Now, how are they going to darshan it? Zot chaya echol. They're going to focus on the word zot, which the first commentary didn't focus on the word zot at all. Just said there's a chaya asher tuchlu, meaning what's a chaya that you can eat? Something that's chaya, that's alive, not something that's going to die. But now they're focusing on zot. Zot means this is. Now, when you say this, you're being very specific, and you're saying some and not others. So what's it saying? Zot chaya echol. You can eat this one, okay, whatever is chaya, but chaya acheret lo. Sorry, I'm in the wrong zot. Right? Sorry. Right. Zot chaya echol. Chaya acheret lo techol. Okay? You can eat these, but not other ones that are like this. Meaning, if we take chaya in the same way to mean alive, this of the alive animals you can eat, but there's other ones of alive animals that you can't eat. Meaning, there are some treifas that aren't. I'm giving you a limited list here. That's why it says zot. These are the ones you can eat, but you can't eat all of them. All of them meaning even all of them from the group of animals that are supposed to be eaten, right? That can be eaten. Well, there's some of them that you can't eat. And that means sometimes you'll have a treifa that could be a live animal and you're still not allowed to eat it. Again, that's based on tradition. There's a tradition that these are the treifot. V'idach. Okay, now, what's the issue here? Well, the first, as I mentioned, the first opinion, who says treifa ein achaya, didn't really use the word v'zot for anything. So they're going to ask, v'idach hay zot my avidle. What did they do with the word zot in that pasuk? Why did it have to start with the word zot? Now, you might remember, we've seen this in a whole bunch of sugyot. I'll remind you of one of them that was not so long ago. Zot ha-menorah. And we said God had to show Moshe what the menorah looked like. Otherwise, Moshe would have never really understood. So he showed him an image of the menorah. Usually when it says zot, it's talking that there's someone like pointing at something. Okay? So, mibayele l'chidetanya. They need it for the following. Chidetana debei Rabbi Yishmael. We need it for this bright of the house of Rabbi Yishmael. Detana debei Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, as we see, this brighta says, Zot hachaya asher tuchlu, milamed shetafas HaKadosh Baruch Hu mikol min v'min. God took all the different kinds of animals, v'hera'ah lo leMoshe, v'amar lo, zot echol v'zot lo techol. God took Moshe and said, these are the animals you can eat, and these are the animals you can't eat. Okay? So now you see that there was this has nothing to do with our topic. This doesn't have to do with treifa. This has to do with kashrut, because that's what really the section's talking about. So, Zot Chayasher Tuchlu, God showed Moshe all the animals that he could eat and all the animals he couldn't eat. Okay? And that's what the Zot is there for. So now we have a problem, because Idach Nami Mibayle Lechidetana Dbei Rabbi Yishmael. The one who says treifa chaya also needs the Zot for that. So how can he use the Zot for saying treifa is chaya, and that some of them you can, some of them you can't? That's right. We're assuming everybody holds by that Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael with the Zot Drasha. So they say in Achinami, and that's why we're going to reject the first answer. You're not going to learn it from Zot Chayasher Tuchlu, because the Zot is needed for that other Drasha. Ela treifa chaya minale. So where are we going to learn the treifa chaya? Well, nafkale mi idach Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael. We're going to learn it from a different bright in the house of Rabbi Yishmael, and that's what. Detana debei Rabbi Yishmael. Now, instead of the first pasuk in the section of kashrut, we're now going to the end of the section of kashrut. Remember, there's a famous pasuk at the end of the section which says, it almost says, what's the purpose of all these laws? Lahavdil ben hatamei uben hatahol uben hachaya ne'echelet uben hachaya shelo te'achel. Right? This is to differentiate between what's tamei, what's tahor, what's kosher, what's not kosher, which animal you can eat, which animal you can't eat. So now, here we're going to darshan the last words there. Bein hachaya hanechelet, between a chaya, if we again go with chaya, means a live animal, right? Not just an animal, but one that will survive. Hanechelet, right? So between, right, we're differentiating between what? A chaya that you can eat and a chaya that you can't eat. Asher lo te'achel. So what does this drasha say? Ele shmonas treifot shenemru leMoshe miSinai. These are the 18 treifot. In other words, what's it saying at the end of the section? There's some animals that survive, that are alive, that you can eat when you slaughter them. And there's some animals that are alive and actually would survive, but because they're in this list of treifot that God passed down to Moshe at Sinai, they can't be eaten, okay? And that's where he gets it from in the end, not from the zot hachaya asher tuchlu, but from the emphasis that says there's a chaya that's eaten, there's a chaya that's not eaten, and that's the treifot. Okay, so that ends our section of searching for a pasuk. Okay, so what we did here is we have two approaches. We see that our Mishna falls in one side of the argument of the machloket, which is any animal that can survive, right, or if this animal can survive for 12 months, right, it's called a treifa. Then we have, now again, I just want to point out, they kind of have they have the same list almost, or we're going to see for the most part, they have the same list, but the question is, what determines the categorization? According to the rabbis, anything that won't survive goes under the category of a treifa. According to Rabbi Yishmael, even if it could survive, it could also be a treifa, right? According to the rabbis, if it could live more than 12 months, it's definitely not on the list. According to Rabbi Yishmael, it would be on the list. And the other difference is, our Mishnah never gave a number, but Rabbi Yishmael gave it a number. There's 18 treifot. Now you might have noticed, as we talked about it before, the Mishnah also listed 18 treifot, okay? So if you see the Mishnah, we have our list, and it goes down to number 18. So both really seem to have this number 18, even though it's interesting, they seem to have different approaches to what's a treifa, what's not a treifa, but they both still have this number 18. Okay? And that's really going to be the main topic now moving forward, which is how do we deal with this 18 number and some other information that we have about treifot that doesn't seem to match that. So now they say v'tuleka. Wait a minute. Is there no more? Okay, now what they're really doing right now is going back to the Mishnah. They're not really talking about the 18 of Rabbi Yishmael, but they're going back to the Mishnah and they're saying, you think this is a comprehensive list? This is not a comprehensive list. V'ha'ika bazgal, which is an abbreviation for 4 more treifot, and shev shmatita, and the 7 traditions that we have. Okay, we're going to see what all this is as we go through the rest of the daf. Okay, turning now to Amud Bet. And now the Gemara says, but there's another 11 treifot that we know about that are not listed in our Mishnah. So how do we deal with that? So they say, okay, bishlama letana didan, ditana tana. Okay, so our Tana of our Mishnah, this is really not a problem. Why? Because what the Tana listed, the Tana listed. That's what they mean by Tana Tana. What the Tana wrote, the Tana wrote. Udashir, and what he left over, atya bezeh klal. You can just include that in the bezeh klal, meaning every time we have this is the general rule, it's not really necessary. So why do they teach it? To teach you that there's more things, and whatever else fits into that rule will be here. So we go back to that list of the Mishnah. We open our chart and we look, and we have all these 18 things, and then we have Bazgal and Shev Shmatata. We have another 11, and we're fine, because that's all included in that phrase at the end of the Mishnah, which is a catch-all phrase. Anything else that's like these is included. Ela letana debei Rabbi Yishmael to Amar. Now don't worry, we're going to get to all the Bazgal and the Shev Shmatata today. If you were worried, if you didn't have enough body parts and issues with animals, we're going to have another 11 that are going to come up. But now the big question is, L'tana debei Rabbi Yishmael da Amar shmonaz treifot. Now Rabbi Yishmael gave it a number. Rabbi Yishmael said it's 18 treifot. That's very clear. There's 18. There's no more. V'tuleka. Now, how could there not be any more? V'ha'ika. And now we're going to start going through the Bazgal. Okay, what about those 4? Okay, and then we're going to explain. Okay, that's why there's 2 sides of Rabbi Yishmael. First, we're going to explain the 4, and then we're going to have like the first explanation of how to read the Mishnah according to him. But then we're going to say, what about the other 7? And then we're going to have to revamp everything and think of a different way to read Rabbi Yishmael, and that's going to be the 3rd part of the chart. If we go down to the last chart on the page, we're now going to go through the Bazgar, the 4 cases. Now, it really should have been Bach Gach, okay, because there's Bet, Chet, Gimel, Chet, but because there's 2 Chets, instead of using the first letter of the word for the abbreviation, they use the second letter of the word for the abbreviation. Okay, so the samach is going to be from the word chisaron, and the resh is going to be from the word charuta. Okay, anyway, we're going to get to all these 4. Don't worry about that. You don't know what these are. Okay, now, is there no more? V'ha'ika behema shenichtachu ragleha mina arkuva u'lamala treifa. We have this other animal that if you cut the leg from the upper part, and up, from basically like the knee part and up, it's a treifa. So what about that one? So we're going to suggest, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says this can actually be cauterized and fixed, and then the animal can survive. And if, what did we say? Well, if the animal can't survive, then it's going to be a treifa. If the animal can't survive, it can be a treifa. Okay, so that's why this animal the problem can be fixed. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Leman ka'amar, letana debei Rabbi Yishmael, tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, treifa chaya sfira lei. Wait, you really confused me, they say. If you say he goes like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says it can be cauterized and fixed, that's because you assume a treifa can't survive, and that's why this one can survive and is not on the list. But we're talking within Rabbi Yishmael. We're trying to figure out within the Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael. Remember, the Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael is of the Shmona Esrei Treifot is on the side of treifa chaya. Remember, the animal could survive; it just has a problem. So the fact that he holds like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says this can be fixed, that doesn't really fit with him, because even if it can't be fixed, it doesn't really make sense. So we're going to say Ela sever like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar damar ksherahi. Okay, so then we're just going to say no. He simply holds like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says this is actually not a treifa; it's completely kshera, and he holds that way, and that resolves it. So basically, why doesn't he have the bet of Bazgal? Because he doesn't think it's on the list, because he doesn't think it's a treifa. He holds like a unique position. Okay, second one. Half of them we're going to answer this way, half of them we're going to answer in a different way. So now we're going to go to one we're going to answer in a different way. So what about ha'ika chisaron b'shidra? Okay, what is chisaron b'shidra? So if the animal, if the animal is missing part of the vertebrae, there's one missing, or two missing, we're going to see. So ditnan. Now here we're going to go to a Mishnah in Ohalot. This has nothing to do with treifa, but it will soon. So there's a Mishnah in Ohalot that said, now you have to understand some laws about Ohalot. Ohalot means that if you have a dead body in a tent, then everything in that tent is impure, right? It passes on impurity to anything in the tent. In order to pass on impurity to things in a tent, you need a kezayit of the flesh of the animal. What if there's no flesh on the animal? It's just bones, okay? If it's bones, it depends. There's all sorts of ways it could be a problem, like you need the majority of the structure of the animal, the bone structure of the skeleton of the animal, or the skull, which is an important part, or the whole vertebrae, which is an important part. So if you have the whole vertebrae, but you're missing, now, if you're missing the vertebrae, chisaron shidra, it's not going to be matame ba'ol. But the question is, how much of the vertebrae need to be missing for us to say, oh, this is not the full thing, and it's not going to be matame in a tent. So that's this machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim shtei chuliot. They say two of the sections of the vertebrae. Ubeit Hillel omrim chulia achat. And Beit Hillel say one is enough. Right? Once it's missing one, it's not going to be matame ba'ohel. Now I want to point out before we move on, which one's the stringent opinion? Typically also Beit Shammai is the stringent opinion. And here too, Beit Shammai says, if it has only one missing, it's still going to carry impurity in a tent. So that's obviously stricter. Beit Hillel says as soon as it only has one missing, it already won't pass on impurity in a tent. You'll see why I'm saying this, because in a minute, they're going to keep with their same positions when it comes to a treifa, but which one's machmir, which one's mekel is going to be flipped. You'll see in a minute. Amar Rav Yehuda. Now, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel don't talk about this being a treifa, but comes Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel many generations after Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, and says, right there, this is Rav Yehuda's second generation. He's quoting Shmuel, his first generation Emora. V'chein l'treifa, and they would say the same by a treifa, meaning if the animal is missing. Now, according to Beit Hillel, one chulia on the vertebrae, right, one of the pieces of the vertebrae, and according to Beit Shammai, two, then it's a treifa. So who's more strict here? Beit Hillel is more strict, because as soon as it's missing one, the animal's already a treifa. Okay, Beit Shammai is the more lenient position now. Now again, it's not like Beit Shammai is more lenient. It's Beit Shammai was strict in that area, but if we apply the same definition to this case of treifa, Beit Shammai is going to be the one who's lenient, because he said one missing, oh, that's not going to make the animal a treifa. You could still eat the animal. Once it has two, it's going to be a problem. Anyway, whether you take Bet Shammai, whether you take Bet Hillel, here's another list of a treifa. You have this chisaron b'shulyat, makes the animal a treifa. So how are we going to resolve this one? Okay, to resolve this one, we're going to do some playing with the list. Okay, and this is going to be the approach we're going to take moving forward with a bunch of the problems. If we take this list, now, we put hemses and beta koso that had a problem. They're both nikvu lachutz, right? They're both two of the stomachs, and they both have the same kind of disqualification, which is there's a perforation on the outside. Any perforation on the outside is going to disqualify it. They say, hemses and beta koso techashav lehu betarte. Now, you put them on the list and you thought they were two. Chashvinu bechada. We're going to count those two as one. Hemses and beta koso nikvu lachutz is one psul. That's number 14. And apichada va'ayil chada. So we take out number 15 and we replace it with chisaron b'shidra. And that's how we resolve that one. Okay? So that's why that's why I put this list next to it. Okay, I didn't put everything else in, but you can see, right, this one gets taken out. Number 15 now becomes chisaron b'shidra. Okay, now we have 4 questions. So we did 1. We said, he doesn't hold that that's a treifa. We did 2. We said, we're going to play with the list and put 2 together and then have room for add another one. Because we don't have, this is the important, we don't have Rabbi Yishmael's list of 18. He just tells us there's 18. Vayika gluda. Okay, gluda is when the whole hide of the animal is off the animal. Okay, if you have an animal that something happened to the hide and there's no skin on the animal, that's a disqualification. So the answer very simply, like we answered the first one, Savar laki Rabbi Meir de machshir. Okay, Rabbi Meir does not think that that's a disqualification, so that's how we resolve the gluda, the gimel of bazgal. Now we get to the last one, ha'ika charuta. Okay, charuta is when the lung shrivels up and hardens. Okay. Now, what about charuta? So they say, we're going to do a replacement here. Mara man katan ela, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, and apik mara va'ayel charuta. Okay, we're going to say, get rid of the gallbladder one. Okay, we have nikva hamara was number 10. So he says, no, that's only one person's opinion, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. But the rabbis don't think that it's a treifa. So we'll say that Rabbi Yishmael, and it's the Mishna, obviously held like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yishmael held like the rabbis. Take that one off the list, put in charuta. Okay? It's a bit of a different tactic than before about the chisaron. Chisaron was we squashed 2 together. This time we said, no, we just flip it. Okay? He doesn't have this one, he has that one instead. Okay, this is a way of playing with the numbers and playing with the cases and coming up with, now we don't really know that Rabbi Yishmael held like the rabbis. We're just suggesting that it makes sense to suggest that. Okay. Now, that was very nice. We did all 4, and that because there weren't so many, there was a good way to deal with it. These 2 he doesn't hold by. Those 2 we play with the list. But now we have a problem because what happened to the ha'ika shev shmatita? We still have the 7 extra ones, okay? The 7, the list of the 7 shmatita. You're going to see why they call it a shmatita. Shmatita is traditions. And we're going to see each rabbi here, different rabbis bring and say, this one's a treifa, this one's a treifa, that one's a treifa. So let's go through the 7 shmatita. Ta'amar Rav Matna. Okay, so each one's quoted by a different rabbi. Rav Matna said, Hai buka de itma de shaf miduchte is a treifa. Okay, this is the head of the femur bone, okay, the top of the thigh, which completely dislocated. Is a treifa. Va'amar Rachish bar Papa, remember him from the Siyum, right? In the Hadran, Rachish bar Papa, Mishmei derive, lakta bechulia achat treifa. If you have a diseased kidney, one of your kidneys is diseased, treifa. Utnan, and another Mishna says, nital hatchol kshera. If you take out the spleen, if the spleen is taken out of the animal, it's fine. But Amar Rav Avira, Mishmei de Rava, Rav Avira says, in the name of Rava, lo shanu ela nital. It's only if the spleen is completely removed. However, aval nikev, if the spleen is in place, but is perforated, that's actually worse, and that's a treifa. So there's Rav Avira, that's number 3. Number 4, Amar Rabba bar Bachana Amar Shmuel, simanim shenidaldalu beruban treifa. If you have the simanim, right, the kaneh and the veshet, that are mostly removed from, mostly detached, that's a problem. Va'amar Rabba bar Rav Shila Amar Rav Matna Amar Shmuel ne'ekrat selam ikarat treifa. If a rib is uprooted from its location, also a treifa. V'gulgolet shenechbesa beruba. If you have the skull, which the head is mostly crushed, that's a problem. Ubasara chofet rova kares berubo treifa. if you have, right, this one second. Right, this is one second, let me just clarify exactly the definition of this one. I don't know why I got stuck on the translation of this one. I meant to check it before class. I see. If you have this flesh that covers, so let's go to the end. You have rov hakeres shenikra, like you have a keres shenikra berubo, okay, and then you have, right, it's the, one second, rov hakeres mechused basar shel dofen abeten, okay. I don't know, I see someone wrote a good English. Let's see. Right, it's this flesh that covers this part of the abdominal wall that I think it was torn underneath, though. Shenikra, right, a rova keres shenikra, that was torn berubo. Okay, so if there's this flesh that covers this tear, okay, something like that, that's a treifa. Okay, not sure I understand it fully, but anyway, we get the idea. There's another treifa here. So that is our 7 treifot. Okay, so now we have 7 treifot here that are problematic. So how are we going to deal with that? Because now we have 7 more treifot on the list, and how on earth are we going to fit that into the 18? So here comes the creative idea, which was basically a takeoff of what we did before. If you remember before, we took the hemses and the beta koso, we joined them together, and then we said, we'll put those two together as one, and then we get another number here. So now we have a different way of doing that, and we say, let's take nikuve timnaya havu. All these nikuvim, which are perforations, if you count them up, there's 8 of them. Okay, nikuvat haveshet, nikev krom shamoach, right? We have the member. We have the membrane in the brain. We have nikev halev. Okay, we have the re'ah shenikva. We have the nikva keva. Nikva. Okay, now remember he doesn't have the mara, so we're getting rid of that one. We have nikvu adakin. We have hakares hapnimi shenikva. We have hemses shenikvu lachutz. We have beta koso shenikvu lachutz. We're going to put those all together. There are 8 cases. And then they're going to be chashvinu kechad. And that's what's on this last side of the chart, all the way on the left. We put all the nikuvim together. I put the tchol here, but that we're going to get to later. Okay? Because one of the sheva shmatata is also a nikuv. But we'll get there in a minute. Right now, we're going to combine 8 on the list of the Mishnah. 8 of the nikuvim were all 1. So we basically free up 7 spots. Perfect. Move in the 7 shmatata. Okay? So nikuvi timnayu, chashvinu bechad, right? Make them count as 1. Apik shev va'ayil shev. Take out 7. Shev is 7, like sheva. Take out 7, put in 7. They say, wait a minute. If you're going to start putting all the nikuvim together, there's another thing that's similar, which is put the psuka together. Psuke, nami trehave. There's psukata gargeret and there's psukat chuta shidra. That means basically it gets cut, right? Completely cut open, right? The majority is cut. So that's also in the chuta shidra, in the spinal cord, and also in the gargeret, in the windpipe. So if we put those two together, then chashvinu b'chad, count them together, then b'tzarlu chada. Now, before we didn't have enough room on the list, now we're short one. So they say, right, ve'od, and furthermore, deravavira mishmei derava nami nekuvahi. Also the spleen, the tchol, according to Rav Avira, if you remember, he said, if you remove it completely, it's fine, but if it has a perforation in it, it's a problem. So one of the 7 is also on the list of which should be stuck in the nekuva. So now we're short 2. We're now short 2. According to Rabbi Yishmael, according to the way we reshuffled the list, we only have 16. So how are you going to deal with that? And we'll just move on to the next step and finish this. Elahanach tarte da afflict lo tapik. Okay, now we have to go back and remember. Okay, it's a good review. In Bazgal, when we started with, right now we're dealing with what happened to the Sheva Shmatata, the extra 7 according to Rabbi Yishmael. But before that, we dealt with the 4, the Bazgad. And for 2 of them, we answered that, he just doesn't hold by them. So now that we're stuck and we're short 2, we're going to say, the Bet and the Gimel of Bazgad go back into the list. Okay, where we said, he must hold like the side that doesn't. Right, because you understand, we don't really know what Rabbi Yishmael thinks. We're just guessing. If he didn't have that, right? If he had only 18, he must not have had those. And we came up with solutions, but we don't really know what he thinks. So in the end, we basically say, and let's just go through his list quickly as a good review. We have all the ones with the nikuvim, the veshet, the krum shel moach, the lev, right, the heart, the re'ah, the lung, the keva, the one of the stomachs, the dakin, the intestines, the kares pnimi, the hemses, and the beta kosod, right? All the stomachs basically with some sort of perforation in it, and the spleen, that's all one. Then we have the psukat gargara, psukat chut hashidra, that's number 2. Then we get to nitala kaved, no liver. We have the re'ah that's missing, the lung that's missing a part. We have the kares pnimi, shenikra rov achitzona, right? The inner stomach that's missing most of the outer part. We have nafla min agag, the trauma one, falling from the roof. We have broke most of the ribs, and we have attacked by a ze'ev. And then we have charuta, right? That's one of the shev shmatita. Right? I'm sorry, that's one of the bazgad, the charuta. And the chisaron b'shidra, that was the samach and the chet, right? The samach and the resh of bazgal. Sorry, not bazgal, bazgal. And then we have, because we already added the other 2 before, right? Sorry, I didn't do this. Charuta and the chisaron b'shidra, those we had in the list originally, I put at the very end, the geludan, the beimash and ragleha. So that adds all 4. And then we have the 6 of the sheva shmatita, because remember, the nikuvat hatchol was already, the spleen was already before. So we have buka de itma, right? The top of the femur bone that was taken out of its place. Lakta b'chuli achad, diseased in one lung. Simanim that mostly came out of their place, right? The kana and the veshet. Ne'ekrat selami ikara, you uprooted a rib from its place, from the source. Gullet, a skull that was mostly crushed. And basar chofet rova keres biruboza. I'm going to look up a little better and explain that to you tomorrow what it means. And with that, we have the 18. Okay, so what did we do today? Today, we basically came up with this list of the Mishna of treifot. We saw that the Mishna is of the approach, which we then found out was a machloket, about whether a treifa is an animal that cannot survive and will die within 12 months, or the approach that it's not. And then we proved which pasuk proves each one. Okay, where's the source? Again, not really the source, but some allusion to it in the Torah. So we took these pasukim out of context about the chayam. We turned chayam to chayim, and then explained each pasuk to say, either it has to be alive, or, some that are alive can be eaten, and some that are alive can't be eaten, but it means some can be, right? So, I'm sorry, some that are alive can't be eaten, meaning sometimes you have a treifa that could survive, but it still can't be eaten. Okay, and then we move from there, since we mentioned that Rabbi Yishmael has these 18, we then started dealing with his list, and first went back to the Mishnah and said, hey, it's missing all these 11, and then we said, it's all included in that zeh haklal. This is the general rule. But then we had to deal with Rabbi Yishmael, who gave it a number. Our Mishnah didn't give it a number, but Rabbi Yishmael gave it a number, 18. Because it was 18, how do we do the 18? And that took us a while to figure out. In the end, we came up with an explanation that includes everything, right? We suggested one possible reading to deal with Bazgal, those 4, but when that didn't work, because what happened to the extra 7, then we had to come up with a completely different way of explaining Rabbi Yishmael's list. And then we were, even after we did such a good job, we were then short, right? We fit in all these 11, but then we were stuck because we fit in, I guess at that point it was 9, and then we were stuck. We had too few, and then we put back another 2 of the Bazgar that we had taken out when we needed to take them out. So in the end, we have our list, and the charts should help you to kind of figure out how to summarize this stuff. And I hope the pictures help. The pictures and the study guide, it's all on both in the podcast details. If you're listening to the podcast, you can find them there, and you can also find them on our website on today's stuff. So with that, wishing everyone a good day.